This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Waco 175th Celebration Series presents Spirited Women of Waco, hosted by Ann Harder.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Waco 175th Celebration podcast. We're calling it the Spirited Women of Waco. And joining me now are Eric Swanson, who's Executive Director of Historic Waco Foundation, and Daniel McKnight, who is HWF's Collections, Events, and Volunteer Coordinator. That's a pretty big title.
It is, yes.
But I had the opportunity to be with you at a fabulous event at the Earl Harrison House, kind of honoring Pat Neff. And it was just an amazing event, wonderful event. And I had the chance to talk to you a little bit about our concept for this podcast to talk about remarkable Waco women of the past. And I figure who better than representatives of Historic Waco Foundation to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, immediately you came up with names. I mean, there was, without missing a beat, you had names. Of course, so, Eric, just a little bit about you, how long you've been in this role as Executive Director.
Yeah, so I've been in this role for a little more than 2 years now.
Okay.
I came from Baylor doing exhibits for the libraries, and this opportunity came up, and I was very excited to take it, and it's been great.
And yourself, Daniel?
I've been here for just about a year and a half or so.
Okay,
I actually
you're both
moved
kind
here.
of new.
Yeah, I actually moved here from Nashville, Tennessee, where I worked at a historic site up there.
Wow, yeah. Well, and it's neat for you to be able to see, a comparison of, great, wonderful, rich history in Tennessee, certainly, as well as here in Waco. But it's really neat to hear your thoughts on who you wanted to profile.
Yeah.
And so it made sense when you immediately said the Hoffman sisters, because the executive headquarters for the Historic Waco Foundation is the Hoffmanette House, the
Hoffman House, yeah.
Hoffman House. They were called the Hoffmanettes,
Yes.
right?
Yes, they
Okay,
were.
that's kind of as much as I know. So
Yeah.
so educate me
Yes.
about the Hoffman sisters.
So they have a really cool story, and it's actually one that I knew before getting to Historic Waco, because when I was working at the Baylor Libraries, there was this old film that had been found in the late 70s that was the first silent film in Waco and actually featured the Hoffmanettes. So I always knew the name, but I didn't realize just how close the house was, the history behind the proximity. So essentially, they were raised here in Waco, and their father, when they were younger, they always were interested in dancing. And their father, for whatever reason, was discouraging it. He did not want them to do this.
Staunch Baptist, maybe? I don't know.
Probably.
Possibly?
Yeah.
You just don't dance?
Yeah. And so
I don't know.
The mother, on the other hand, very much was encouraging her
Yeah.
daughters. And actually, there's a story about how she used to sell buttermilk to raise the funds so they could start taking dancing lessons. And so the daughters, they just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And they eventually ended up opening up a dance studio downtown here in Waco.
Yeah.
And so actually, it's really cool. After their father had passed, they actually moved the dance studio to their house. At the time, it was located on Webster, and then they eventually moved it to its current location. So at Historic Waco, that's something that we're trying to do, is how can we bring some of those dance elements into the actual house?
Yeah.
So we have plans to expand kind of the back area and put up pictures of the old dance recitals that they used to have, some of their handwritten notes, some pictures, kind of an homage to them, because it's really cool that we're basically working out of their house.
Yeah. Now, they were known as the Hoffmanettes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Faye and Bird.
Bird, yes.
And you've kind of done a little research trying to figure out, was that really her name, Bird?
Yes.
Or was it a nickname?
So I saw one line saying that in 1917, they actually we used to teach dances to the soldiers that were stationed here, Camp MacArthur.
Yeah.
And so I read a line one-off saying that one of the soldiers gave them that nickname. But again, I couldn't see that anywhere else. So we just called them Faye and Bird.
Faye and Bird. Well, and generally what time period? I mean, we didn't talk any dates.
So they were born the late 1800s, basically, and
Okay.
so they were operating in
Victorian kind of era.
Yeah, and so they were operating in the 1910s through the 1930s and 40s. So pretty much for 3 decades, they taught people in Waco how to dance. And it's really fascinating just seeing the amount of people who actually reference them from that time period. Apparently, the two were very eccentric. They love to dress up in wild clothing. There's this phenomenal picture we have of the two of them in clown outfits, which scared me when I first found it. But they very much had a great sense of humor. They were bombastic, really enthusiastic. They loved what they did. The community loved them. It was really interesting. After they had passed, a year after they passed, in I think it was 1972, they immediately got a marker for them, just kind of honoring their legacy. So they were clearly a really big part of the Waco community when they were active.
Kind of characters.
Yes, very much.
Definitely characters. So, Daniel, when I was asking you the same thing, the name that came first to your mind was?
Bobby Barnes, because she was really the heart and soul of Historic Waco.
We wouldn't have Historic Waco Foundation without
We would not.
Livonia.
Yes.
Barnes,
Her real name was Livonia Barnes, but when she was just a little baby, her mom put her in a short dress, and her mom said something along the lines of, "Oh, you've got like a little bobtail there. Oh, I'll call you Bobby."
Oh, really?
And that's where she got the nickname Bobby Barnes.
Oh, and to see her portrait of, that doesn't seem to fit,
Yeah.
very-
Well, she did keep a sort of bobbed haircut. For the rest of her
I guess
life.
that's true. Yeah, sort of a bobbed haircut. But yeah, what a passionate lover of history, particularly Waco's history.
She was.
Yeah.
Yes.
What kind of things did piqued your interest about Bobby Barnes?
Well, I thought it was really interesting that it was, in a way, the Earl Harrison house where Historic Waco recently had the Patina food tour located. That was the house that, in a way, started it all for Bobby Barnes. She was 14 years old when her family moved from close to the Dallas area here to Waco. And the first Sunday after they had moved here, her dad, since they both loved old houses, her father said, "Hey, let's just drive around the town and see what old houses we can find." So they drove out towards Baylor, and on their way back, they found the Earl Harrison house. So they went up, she put her hand on the cypress pillar and said, "Daddy, if I ever get enough money, I want to restore this house." And he said, "Well, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything." And one day, sure enough, one of her friends said, "Hey, you've been such a dear friend to me all these years. Here's a blank checkbook. Pick any house. I'll fix it up." And she picked the Earl Harrison house.
She knew.
Yes.
And I believe that took place Christmas Eve, correct?
It did. And that very same day, it was Nell Pape, who was the dear friend. They were actually next door neighbors. Well, technically backyard neighbors. But so literally on Christmas Eve, they met. She said, "Hey, I'll restore any house you want." And she said, "I want to restore the Earl Harrison house." And Nell Pape said, "I'm not sure I know which house you're talking about." So Bobby Barnes was like, "Oh no, I hope it's still there." So that same Christmas Eve, they drove over to the Earl Harrison house, which used to be located right across the street from where the Hoffman house is now. That was the location where the In-N-Out Burger
I was going to
is.
say In-N-Out Burger's
Yep.
there now.
Yep. So
Yeah.
they went there, and they literally went there, and Nell Pape actually said, "Bobby, I know you want to fix this house up, but it might be a little too far gone." And she was like, "No, I believe in this house. We're going to fix it."
Oh my
So
goodness.
They brought a professional architect. He took a look at it and said, "Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it can be done. It's all reasonable. This house will last a long time if you take care of it." And sure enough, it has lasted a long
And of course,
time.
the first thing that had to be done was to move it.
Yes.
And what year did that happen? Do you remember?
I believe that it was in the 1960s. I think 1967, if I remember.
I believe so. Yeah.
And that was interesting because Nell Pape loved giving to various charities and people, but she did it anonymously. So when the house was moved, she insisted that no one tag her name to it until after it had been moved. And so when the house got stuck in the mud overnight because of heavy rains, there were some neighbors calling Bobby Barnes saying, "Hey, you own the Johnson Taylor house. Do you know what's up about this house that's being moved here?" And she said, "No, I don't know anything
I don't know
about it."
anything
No
about
idea.
it. Have no clue.
Because she promised her friend she would keep
Yeah.
her anonymous until afterwards.
And of course, its final home is right next to the Nell Pape house.
Yes.
So let's talk about Nell Pape too. I mean, you mentioned her. Her story is fascinating, and had the opportunity to go to the home just a little bit outside of the Waco area.
Yeah.
Well, it's in Waco, but not in the downtown area, where she and her husband, Nell Pape, and her husband built their home.
Yes.
It looks like an Austrian chalet.
Yeah, it's really cool. I actually drove past it maybe about a month ago because I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's pretty close to the house currently, the Earl Harrison house.
Mm-hmm.
And it has that beautiful Germanic look because Gus, or Gustav Pape was his full name. He was actually from Germany, and but he became quite a successful cotton salesman. So he actually moved to the United States and worked for an American company, which was a bit awkward in World War II because even though his family had no ties to Nazism, he still tried to support relatives in Germany just so that they wouldn't starve, which obviously a lot of people were curious, hey, why are you sending money to Germany? That seems a little bit
must
weird.
be some nefarious thing going on
but
here.
he only had good intentions. And of course, after Gustav years later had multiple strokes, his wife, Nell Pape, also decided, hey, I want to help everyone around. And so she gave a lot of money to various people, even to the degree that just ordinary staff that worked for them, like gardeners, if they worked for her for 2 years, she would buy them a house and a car. She was that generous.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I had heard the story that when she was there, because again, it's in a little more rural setting. It's not in like a downtown neighborhood. There's property around it. And there was a training accident with an airplane with having to do maybe with Camp MacArthur, and saw the plane go down.
Mm-hmm.
And it disturbed her so. She said, I'm not staying here. And that's why she moved into town to that red brick house there.
Oh, interesting. I had not heard that story. I think one of the really exciting things about taking over management of the Earl Harrison house is that there's so many of these stories that we're disconnected from. And so we learn something new about Nell or the property every single day. We were even just talking a story about bluebonnets and the person who had named them. So like I said, there's a lot
how
of interesting
they became
things.
the state official flower.
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of just, anecdotal stories about, how history and finding maybe a letter or finding something official that would, kind of codify that as something historically accurate. It's really kind of interesting how all that works. We're grateful for the Texas collection.
Yes.
The yeoman's work they do
Yeah.
in maintaining the history. But that certainly is what you both are tasked with doing through Historic Waco Foundation and the beautiful homes, the historic homes that are part of HWF. Let's talk a little bit about them as well.
So each one of the houses that we have, the first one that we have right next door to our headquarters at the Hoppin House is the Earl Napier Kennard House. So the Earls, the Napiers, and then the Kennards were the three families who ended up owning those houses. And when we're talking about the woman, my favorite story is the Kennard sisters who actually lived in the house. They were the ones who, in about like the late 30s, early 40s, the house is in the current location, pretty close to Baylor, and so they decided to move out of the upstairs of the house and just live in the downstairs, and they actually rented the upstairs to Baylor students. And so we had really fascinating document. We had the 1940 census?
1940 census.
The 1940 census, and of the four gentlemen who were listed living in the upstairs, one of them ended up being the future president of Baylor,
Abner McCall.
Which is really cool. And so ironically, for the person who lived in that Earl Napier Kennard house, he was the driving force behind I-35 going through, and the plan was to have it go through and demolish essentially the Earl Napier Kennard house and the Earl Harrison. And so that's partly why the Earl Harrison house was moved. because they thought, well, the I-35 is going to go
It's
right
going to
through
just
here.
row right through.
But then eventually, a group of citizens got together, and I-35 is in its current location, which
Just
we were
sort
all
of
very thankful
scooted
for.
over just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just you can certainly see that lovely home from the highway. Little off the beaten path then would be East Terrace.
Yes. So East Terrace, the home of Howard Mann, and so his wife, Samira, we have lots of very fascinating stories about her.
Yeah.
The one story that people always seem to remember whenever they visited the East Terrace house was the story about East Terrace used to be located on a terrace right by the Brazos River, and the river used to flood all the time.
Right.
All the time. And so the story went that the bottom of East Terrace was flooding. And so allegedly, Samira, she took her cow and she led it up the stairs, and so the cow was there, so she saved the cow. And that's a story that for years Historic Waco docents told. So when I took over, I was like, okay, maybe we gotta maybe look into the authenticity of this story.
Yes.
But then we keep on doing more research, and then someone in someone else's notes, they made a casual reference to the cow. So now we're kind of like, well, maybe this actually did happen. So it's, history is very fascinating in that regard. I love it, just the way that it influences people and in their lives and, things they remember.
So we've talked about three of them. There's more. But wait, there's more.
I have more houses to manage than I have full-time staff.
Yeah, I know.
So the last house is the McCullough House. Mm-hmm. And so that's also located on Fish Street, 5th and Columbus. Yeah. And so that house is actually the home of one of the first doctors in Waco. At the time, it was just a small kind of brick cabin. And then they extended it to what it is now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always been so impressed with the work of Historic Waco Foundation in maintaining these beautiful historic homes, what they mean to the history of Waco. It takes a lot of money to maintain historic homes because they're just not built like modern homes are.
No, I wish somebody told me before I took over how often things break in those old homes. I thought everything was going to be super easy, but go figure.
Yeah, and of course, you've got historic structures that things have to be done in a certain way.
Exactly, yeah. And so a good example of this is the Earl Harrison House. When we took over management last January, or last February, we had that big ice storm in January, and there was a water leak.
Oh, no.
And so a lot of the flooring in the dining room area was completely destroyed. The wallpaper was destroyed. We had to make a bunch of repairs. And so it wasn't as simple of, okay, let's just get some wood flooring. We had to go, okay, what was the original wood flooring?
Yeah.
Can we get as close as possible to what that was? So we actually sourced local pine that was from an old warehouse, essentially. And that was, I believe, the early 1900s, 1910s, something around that area, 1890s, around there. So it's of the period, which is great. And then the wallpaper, I am a simple man, and I assumed the wallpaper was going to be a very easy decision. But there was a lot that went into that decision.
Yeah.
A really interesting thing about the homes is that when you look at a historic home, people assume that, okay, this house is how it was at a certain day when it was built or around that time period. But actually a lot of houses, when they get restored, or for example, in Historic Waco, we got most of our houses in the late 60s and the 70s. A lot of those houses, they were damaged, and so we had to restore them. And so it was people from the 1970s doing their interpretation of what they thought those houses would have looked like. So the wallpaper isn't always entirely accurate. And so that actually gave us the rare opportunity to choose wallpaper that was extremely accurate and to the time period. And so the wallpaper now in the Earl Harrison house is based off the wallpaper at the Galliard house. And so we had Dr. Ken Haverteep. He helped supervise. He was on our wallpaper task force committee. It was very elite.
He's a good expert.
He is, good person to have in your corner.
To have on that kind of thing. And you've got great volunteers too.
Yes, we could not do it without them.
Over the years, when I think about how much it is to maintain one historic home, and you've got multiple historic homes and a cadre of people that are passionate about this.
Yeah.
But I guess, Daniel, you can always use more volunteers.
We can, yes. We're always happy to have more volunteers. The more volunteers, the easier the work is for everyone. especially during the holidays, which are, of course, coming up in the next few months. I say few months with it being August, but we've already been planning a few months for our plans this upcoming Christmas.
Right, and lots of new events and new things that you're wanting to do to get more people, into the homes to see them, and not just the typical, Christmas tour, those
Exactly.
kind of things. I guess you're still planning to do
Yes, because
some of those kind of things.
that's part of the unique aspect of my work with Historic Waco is finding out how do we present the history. And that's part of the reason why we did the historic food tour themed on Pat Neff, because if you think about it, on an ordinary house tour, the ways that you learn are through the five senses. However, when you're on a normal house tour, you can only use two senses,
Right.
sight and hearing. Well, on a food tour, you use all five of your senses. And so that's part of the ways we try and create new ways of exploring history so that way it remains new, interesting, and relevant and deeply personal for everyone enjoying it.
Well, what's exciting about visiting with you on this particular podcast is that it came about thanks to the Jacob de Cordova Society, a relatively brand new organization that sort of sprang up out of a desire to recognize Waco's 175th anniversary. And again, that's what this podcast is all about. And we're so excited that Historic Waco Foundation is one of the sponsors of some of the events that are helping to mark that 175th. And one of them is the kickoff party and then scavenger hunt on September 6th and 7th. The kickoff will be at the Texas Music Cafe on the 6th. There'll be music and fun from 6 to 10. Tickets are $75 with heavy appetizers and drinks. We will hear a performance by Kelsey Ray, who has written a special song for Waco. It's called the Waco, A City to Believe In, and it's awesome. I heard her perform it. And then our great friend at Baylor University, Dr. Steve Sloan, is helping to shepherd our scavenger hunt,
Yes.
which will be on the 7th. So that's going to be something, for all ages to take part in. And the homes are going to be involved heavily with this. Do you want to talk a little bit to that? What's happening with the scavenger hunt?
So this was something that Historic Waco, we had been kind of independently trying to develop, a walking tour. Because my goal as director is, the mission of Historic Waco isn't just to talk about our cool houses.
Right.
It's to talk about the history of Waco. And so for a long time, we were really focused on those houses. So as a former president of the organization used to say, like, it's time for Historic Waco to step off of the porch. It's time to go out to the
I
people.
love that. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And so the walking tour for us was going to be a really good example. And so then when we first were talking with the De Cordova Society, we thought that a scavenger hunt would be a good kind of blend of both things. And so there was going to be about, I think, 8 sites that people are going to be able to go to. They have clues that they have to try to decide, and they're going to use the Waco History app that Dr. Sloan helped make. And it's going to be a really cool event. And at each location, there's going to be some sort of activity that the people are going to have to do in order to get the next set of clues.
Great family activity.
Yes.
And individuals as well. And still looking for sponsors. We'd love to take anyone from up to $500 to $5,000 to serve as a sponsor for these two events. But we want to thank Rogue Media, certainly the Rogue Media Network, for their help. Creative Waco, Waco Convention Center and Visitors Bureau, the Texas Jewish Historical Society, and the Waco Educators Alliance. So really a group of people that have come together in organizations to help really showcase Waco's 175th. And this opportunity to talk about these fabulous Waco women is wonderful, because I've learned more about them. Now, these ladies are ones I've been familiar with, but not really necessarily known a lot about. And so it's great, Eric and Daniel, for you to come and share your insights on these spirited women of Waco. And so anyway, we hope to see a lot of people at these wonderful events. There'll also be the showing in November of a premiere of a movie called My Beautiful Daughter, about Jacob de Cordova and his role in helping to found the city of Waco, to lay out the plots and sell those plots of land. He was pretty pretty instrumental
Yeah.
in the settling of it. So again, thank you both for all you do with the Historic Waco Foundation, and it's going to be a great time as we continue to celebrate Waco's 175th anniversary. So we're glad to have you with us, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Bye-bye.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.